the Okwapehini of Reponkesi or Siadio, Kwesia Kufu, the third, and his counsel for this opportunity. Thank you, Nifahine Ehunabobrim, Osio Dumja, Otutu Abebio. When I prepared for this lecture, I asked somebody to tell me how I should greet when I come here. I'm sure that it is Osio Dumja, Otutu Abebio, the faith, who would mark this for me, whether I said it right or not. I told you Osodumja will help me. He just did. Thank you very, very much. Well, before I go to the wall, I said something in the Okre language. They told me the meaning was good afternoon. And I'm sure it is true. Yes. Well, for the purpose of this lecture, I want to review something little about the Tripon language. The Tripon language. I am doing this deliberately because Nana Chair has said a lot about what I would say. So let me concentrate on this and I'll come back to the wall. There is a seeming position of Tripon meaning, which means to some people something else. But I dare say that the question of whether Tripon is a language or not must be approached carefully. The historical evidence suggests that Tripon was certainly understood by 19th century missionaries and linguists as a speech form or language tradition. However, the same evidence also shows that Tripon should not be reduced merely to a language in the narrow modern linguistic sense. Rather, Tripon appears to have functioned as an ethno-linguistic designation, referring at once to a people, a speech community, a Guan-related identity, and a historical cultural group spread across several settlements in Equiapeng and beyond. Well, let me also say that in my research, I did not readily come across Okre language. Maybe in the early 19th century and the 18th century, the Okre was not really used, but the Tripon was very much used. That is why I want you to understand the word Tripon as a language or something else. It is very important to me, and I know that Nanache is also very, very important to Nanache. All right. The earliest and clearest evidence comes from Reverend J.J. Crystalis, a grammar of Asante and Fanti language called Chi of 1875. In his introductory notes, Crystalis observed that 5 Tripon towns, Ebrio, Odewu, Eukuga, with Abonse, Edukrum, and Aprede, have retained their own language, besides speaking Akan. This statement is significant because, first, Crystalis explicitly said that the Tripon towns and their own language, meaning that in the 19th century, Tripon was not simply considered ordinary Akan or Chi. It was recognized as a distinct speech tradition existing alongside the Akan. Secondly, Crystalis' comment that these people also spoke Akan shows that Tripon communities were either bilingual or multilingual. They had retained their own speech while also participating in Akan speaking political and social life. This is important because it explains why Tripon could later be described in forms such as Tripon Chi. It was not necessarily pure Akan, but neither was it untouched by Akan influence. Crystalis' second statement strengthens this argument further. He wrote that the Guan language is still used in Enum, beyond the Volta, and to the northeast Akwemu. This dialect is not much different from that of Date, and Tripon. Date is latte. Here, Crystalla places Tripon in relation to Guan. This suggests that Tripon was understood as closely related to the Guan language family, or at least to a Guan dialect. The mention of latte alongside Tripon is important because latte, like Tripon, appears in older sources of parts of a wider known Akan or Guan-related speech zone. Therefore, Tripon should not be treated simply as a sub-form of Chi. Rather, it may be better understood as a Guan-related speech tradition that became heavily influenced by Akan because of the political and cultural history of Akuapem. Well, the reports of David Asante on Salaga journey provide even more important evidence. Writing to Basel on 19 September 1878, David Asante identified people he met who spoke what he called a Tripon language, or a Tripon-like form of speech. He observed that in Kratchi, the people spoke a sort of Chi like Tripon. He also mentioned places such as in Chumuru and in Kwakwakro as speaking a form of Tripon. Most importantly, he stated that at Salaga, the real Salagas were Tripon people who still spoke a kind of Tripon more than that of their neighbors to the south. This report is extremely valuable because it shows that Tripon was not confined only to the Akuapem range. David Asante's use of the term suggests a wider historical distribution of Tripon-related people or speech forms, stretching into areas such as Kratchi, Inchumuru, and Salaga. His phrase Tripon Chi is also important. It suggests a contact language or mixed speech form. A Tripon face or identity expressed through Chi influence form. This reinforces the point that Tripon should not be rigidly interpreted as a single, isolated language with fixed boundaries. Instead, it should be understood historically as a speech tradition shaped by movement, settlement, trade, political contact, missionary encounter, and multilingual exchange. Well, from these sources, one may draw a balanced conclusion. Tripon can be described as a language in the sense that 19th century sources recognize it as a distinct speech form. Crystalla expressly says that Tripon towns had their own language, besides Akan. David Asante also speaks of Tripon speech and the Tripon Chi. However, Tripon should not be interpreted only as a language. It should also be understood as a people, an identity, and a historical category. A more accurate interpretation is therefore that Tripon was an ethno-linguistic identity associated with Guan-related people and speech forms, especially in Akuapem, Enum, and some other areas. Well, the next time we meet, remind me that I will also talk about Tripon. Okay, boom, boom. Enough of this academic work. I want us to move to how this war has influenced the Akuapem people. As this program is exclusively designed for the Nifa division, I will shed a little light on the reasons behind the Akuapem's celebration of Ujra. Further, I will discuss Nifa division's contribution to the Akuapem Wars overall, with particular emphasis on the Akatamanso War. This decisive confrontation at the Battle of Katamanso near Dodua on 7th August 1826 is a one to remember at all times, especially in 2026 that we are celebrating the bicentennial of the Ujra. This battle was fought between the Asante Army and the allied forces of Akuapem. Echrese enye Akuapem fonkwana eko sa osai. Akuapem Achem, Fante, Enkran, Akwemu, Krobofo, Osudokufo, Shaifo, Afe Abrofo te se Danes, Dutch, and a British, and a Kosa or Queen. Well, the battle represents a pivotal moment in Gold Coast history and is widely regarded as an event that marked the decline of Asante military dominance over the southern states. Yeah, me pese me ma yeti ase ne se ebra ye ko sa Queen ana sa osai no na asantefo edi ntintiman ewo oman yi mu pa na se wo ma ohomene so a na baby fo bia adwane na obia epe baby akọ enti sanse oma ohomene so a na obia epe baby akọ nti nipa bi hwe se kwan be na ye befa so a ye bebre won ase ebio enye kuapem nkwa ne ko sa osai gitum sa enye kuapem nkwa ne ko sa osai. Well, if we talk about Kuapem people, who are the Kuapem people? Prior to 1730, we had some people on the Kuapem Ridge, but they have had a lot of issues, so they had to resort to the Ochihene Council to invite Ochihene to help them. Ochihene brought Safori to help them lead the war so they become independent. They did after the war with the Kwemu people. Now, the Okuapemang in itself was formed in 1733. Safori consolidated loyalty through a ritual at Abutechi, which involved oath-taking. All the factions pledged allegiance and formed 5 divisions and integrated themselves into their camp military traditions with Trepons, Guans, Kamines constituting the core component of the Okuapemang as at that time. Well, records already show that the first Adaibutu festival was celebrated on September 26, 1826. And the first Ojra festival was celebrated from 16th to 20th October 1826. That is the main reason why we are celebrating our 200th Ojra this year. I want to reiterate that the Ojra is a yearly event, that we cannot say that at some point the Akuapem people did not celebrate Ojra. So you can't say Ojra no edu baby ojaye ena osan to aso a enye if you say afi da adeyo a ye edidra Okuapemang. Well, the war in itself in 1826 did not come in a fluke. Eye bibi ne koka bibi na bibi ye bibi. Enti mpanisa ukoto se nipa benu kontokwa a emisa se eden na esi na mbisa se na ano eden na esi. Before the 1826 war, there was a war in 1824 called the Nsamanko War. In fact, it was as a result of this Nsamanko War that we lived to see the 1826 war. In the Nsamanko War, Sir Charles McCarthy had marched in February 1824 to fight the Asantes. Upon seizing the large army, the Fanti and Wassa soldiers fled, leaving their arms behind, leaving unfortunate Sir Charles McCarthy and his men with the Dentra forces to fight the Ashanti and Anomansa alliance. Well, this Sir Charles McCarthy did not survive because the Asante army was more than the army he was coming with. So he was beheaded. He was beheaded. The Akatamanso in itself was fought for revenge. Na Santefono say, Ebra, oni Charles McCarthy kokun no, nipa binsu kobwai, na enkranfo, achimfo ne Akuapemfo ka ho.
And Tiesan Samobabwa won't know, Niayano, Yanso, Yanemobacom. Naya say, Mudim Kunimo and so, and I'm Munim Kunimo and so. Enti Nana Oseya Wakoto, Eya Nadrin said, Onin crying for Becom, Onia Tim for Becom, Onia Quapim for so, Ebecom. Nana onim say abrofo so afane ho adwen de da enti British for Danes for any Dutch for na onim say wonyonko broni bi ye kunu no oye wan adwen say ene ye nso ye bedi anim na ya hwe na asantefo edi enkuku. Well, the Asantes were so formidable that they believed they could defeat their enemies even though they are on their own territory. One day oba oswa was say obebo na wa bra osu enti baby a obia obetimi aba ho na wa bebo if you say ye frɛ om kuma pem a apem beba. Asantehene Oseya set off from Kumasi with his army, which numbered about 40,000. The army marched through Achim and Ekuapem towards Dodowa, because they had received intelligence on where their enemies were and where they had gathered. Well, like every war king, the Asante's 40,000 men had 12,000 forming the center, 10,000 to the right wing, 8,000 to the left wing, 8,000 to the rear, 2,000 to the reserve of the king's bodyguard. The army of the coast was made up of, as I said, Ekuapem, Achims, Osudoku, Krobos, Akwemus, Shai, Fanti, Dutch, Danes, and the British. The early morning of 7th August 1826 proved to be a critical period as warriors from both sides prepared for battle by performing various rituals. Sabri nimuno, yen koko ewo bra, yen nyankuma debi. Enti obia oba okono, or the nyami bi or the nyoma or gidi any nyoma obetimi dia kokono na ye na ekokono enya tione asekan kwana sabre no na ye de ko okon abrofo no de no kwasem ne se na wo gidi se ationi asekan ne beboa won nanso ye ntimamufo de na ye gitum se ye nro nso ebeboa ye mpa enti asantefo ne ba won so or the no ebai, or the abosom by, or the neoma ebai. Well, the conflict persisted and persisted and persisted until the Asantes were defeated on the 7th August 1826. So 7th August 1826, eya Asante fontam kesiye na wokan Untimin sorry enyaho de biarada. Nipa bi kura kase sa 7th August 1826 inti ena ahema no etwa dancing cry no ebisa de bi si won cry ana ehu na eto wom na emu oden papa. Eye sabri mu ena senia maka ne da na mekoso aka ne se asantefo ana o se eye kuma pem beba no asantefo a na wose onimko na onim adwane no saabere ni mu na okono efono wo munti odwane akon. It was during the Akatamansu War that the Ekuapem army captured the Asante war god and the stool regalia associated to the Ojra festival. I'm sure we heard already that the Odosu, the war deity, was captured by the Ekuapem people during this war. And this gives the Ekuapem people the right to celebrate the Ojra festival. Well, we are at Nifa, so I add a little from Nifa out of what the chairman said. The Nifa division, led by the Edukrom Ekuapem people in 1826, also was part of this war. They contributed significantly to the Battle of Akatamanso. During this period, Nana Otutu Abebio II, also known as Ohene Koko, held the titles of the Dukrom Hene and Nifahene. So it's not surprising that we have Nana Otutu Abebio V, who is in seat here. In fact, Nana Otutu Abebio II was responsible for commanding the right wing during the conflict. At that time, the Nifan division was made up of Edukrom Ebru, Dewuwe Ukugwa, Prede, Abonse. Yeah, even though we have Asesiasu today, by that time it had not been a separate community. So they were part of the Abonse people that they went for war. So it's not like Asesiasu doesn't exist now. It does exist and still exists. But by that time, they were part of the Abonse people during the war. In those times, war was so important that it was tactical and required a good approach. Each of the towns joined in for the Akatamanso War, with the Dukrom being the head of all the towns and the Niva divisions. There are two groups cannot be left out, the Apeja and Asonko. They also went along with their deities in this time of war. Because these two groups went together, they are war captains. Ochiame Kwame Ansa, Osafini Labi Bedietio, and Osafini Kwesi Odoi. Also, Asonko Edu, Asonko Obo Niayim, Osafini Ose, Osafini Labi Buakon, and Osafini Kwaudakon were together and they tactically supported this war. Nifa division also had some deities who helped them in the Akatamanso War. Let me mention a few. Otutu, Kwajabi, Akwesinyansiamwa, Mankosa, and Lampo were some of these deities they sent to the war. Maybe I might not mention their names well, forgive me. Well, as the chair said, the inhabitants of Aprede were very integral in this war. They were part of the Niva division and they did their work as they're supposed to do. They are reported to have captured the Odosu and the umbrella from Ashanti at Akode. In the local dialect, this event is commemorated as Yache Asantefono Akonte. Well, let me end with some of the things that we brought home. Nifaman acquired various items from the military. Let's state that in those times when you even acquire something from the war, it is a prerogative of the Okwapehine to just put this in your hand with the help of his kronti. So the Obuaman umbrella, the Odosu, their Sonkodram, their Pejadram, some in the Ruta and some flags were acquired and given to the Nifa division for keeps. Indeed, the Nifa division really helped this war and Nana Adodankwa during the war. And it must always be mentioned that the Nifa division's bravery and the support of their deities helped us to defeat the Asante people at the Katamanso on 7th August 1826. Thank you very much.
The Pod.